Welcome to episode 4 of the Ultimate Grinder Showdown. 5 reviews over 5 days, and on the 6th day, a big head-to-head of some of the best grinders that money can buy. And today, we're looking at this. It's the Levercraft Ultra. And there's a lot going on here. There's the grinder, there's a box, there's another box. What's this all about? It's an interesting approach, and there's some genuinely new technology inside this thing. Let me give you a little bit of backstory on this grinder and the companies behind it, because there is more than one. Now, Levercraft are based in the US. It's founded by a guy called Eric Mann. He started off, I think, kind of repairing vintage lever machines. He has a coffee roasting company and a cafe in Austin. He does not build these grinders. The Ultra is a grinder that is built in China and is available in China also, direct from the manufacturer. Levercraft have built a relationship with that manufacturer where they're having a customized version of that grinder brought into the US. This grinder is $2,600, which seems kind of surprising when you can see that the Ultra is available in China for $1,100, but know that that's shipping within China. If you start to export it from China, then you're going to pay all sorts of shipping and duties and other things like that. There seems like a price discrepancy, but I can understand where that money is going in this particular situation. I also don't know, without putting a normal Ultra next to it, what the difference between an Ultra in China is versus the sort of Levercraft version. I don't know what's been customized. Inside this are 98mm burrs, and this is the first, I think, of the run that has blind burrs. So by that, there's no screw holes, similar to the EG1 that we talked about before. Now, at 98mm, like the Malkonig EK43 and the Monolith Max, that's a very large burr set. Compared to the 80mm burrs of the EG1 or the 64mm burrs of the P64, 98mm burrs are huge. They're monstrously huge, and so these 3 grinders are kind of comparable in that particular regard, and this burr set is certainly interesting. But we'll grind some coffee in a little bit. There's a few more things to talk about, namely, what is this big giant box next to the grinder? In fact, what's this little box here? We'll start with the little box because it'll explain the big box. Here on the little box is your controller. This dial adjusts your RPM, and it goes down to 0, which isn't particularly useful, but up to 2500. And ultimately the burrs won't really turn below 150 RPM. Certainly without any resistance, and if you put coffee in there, you'd need a little bit more torque to get things going. This button starts and stops the grinder, and you'll notice it's very quiet. Now, it's obviously louder when you grind coffee, but when it's running, you could easily leave this running and not realize. There's some pretty hefty power connections at the back of the grinder connecting it to this controller box. Now, what this grinder is able to do beyond just variable RPM is RPM profiling, where you can program the grinder to run at different RPMs for different periods of times and ramp up or down between different speeds as you desire. This is interesting, but also a kind of, it reminds me of pressure profiling. There was a technology that was an answer in search of a question. And I think at this point we're getting closer to finding uses for pressure profiling because we ultimately understand flow within espresso better than we did before. But I don't yet have an obvious use case for RPM profiling. Now, Eric does suggest one, which is you could run your grinder at, say, 500 RPM for 10 seconds and then ramp it up to 2500 to kind of blast out any coffee that might be remaining in the burr chamber. And you could do this manually. If I wanted to, I could start the grinder and twist the dial at the end to ramp it up, or, an automated version of that is kind of nice, though I will say that's not really a problem I've needed solved. It doesn't really retain a ton of coffee in here, so I haven't really wanted to bother setting that up. It just doesn't seem super useful, but I get it's an interesting idea. I can't get away from the fact that this is a lot of stuff. It's a lot of stuff to put on a counter. This is an expressly domestic piece of equipment. This is not designed to go into cafes. And I'm kind of confused by the idea that I've seen this discussed as kind of a box that should go under counter. In my kitchen, the sockets, the power is above counter. And so I'd have to kind of drill a hole in my bench, run power down to my control box, run the 2 power cables back up from my control box into the back of the grinder just to hide this thing. If I've got a big kitchen or if I've got a big espresso making space, I could probably accommodate that. I'm sure you could put the box under the grinder if you wanted to. It's sturdy, it's sealed. I wouldn't worry about that, but it's a lot of stuff. It's not particularly heavy. The grinder itself is extremely heavy. This thing is an absolute monster in terms of weight. Design-wise, I like the red on there. It's, there's a pretty monochrome feel across the other grinders here, so a little splash of color I think is quite a nice thing. That seems to be custom to Levercraft from what I've seen of the Ultras made in China and sold in China anyway. And then the rest of the design, I have kind of mixed feelings about. There's a kind of heat-sinky vibe around the motor here. This, to me, has become a place to collect dust that is not particularly easy to clean, and so I don't love that aspect of it. If you like the styling and the design, you know, it looks nice, it's well made, it feels solid. Tolerances seem extremely tight, and they're very pro talking about the very well aligned burr set in this thing too, which is a good thing. Before we make coffee, I just want to go through the accessories, because here I think Levercraft have done a fantastic job. First up, I'll go with this. It's the Portafilter dosing ring. This one is magnetic, which is just very pleasurable. Now it's designed so that you just click it on, it sits on top, it's great, and you put it under here, and everything sits level, and this sort of holds everything in place, and that does work really very well. I haven't had any falls, nothing's gone awry with this. That is a nice little accessory. Second up is the distribution tool. This is a very nice one. This is lots of little needles, it's very easy to use, it's very satisfying to use, it feels very nice. Of all the tools that have been included, this is my favorite. It just pleases me to use. The one extra they had sent me after the grinder had shipped is this Bellows, which also is a little dosing funnel, and it's quite clever. It's actually two pieces. There's a compressible kind of rubber bellows here, but this sits inside it, and this is very clever because at the bottom it's kind of sealed, but when you press it, it opens. So that means you put it on top of your grinder, you put your dose in there, you run the grinder, and when you're ready to start grinding, push your hand down, it'll drop the beans in, and you'll start grinding, and then afterwards you can pump this as a bellows to blow through a little bit of air to clear out the chamber. That is a very nice, very simple, very clever piece of design. Yeah, hats off to Levercraft for that one. I really like it. What seems slightly at odds with this is the little bean dosing cup that comes with it, that's clearly a 3D print, and it's not bad, it just doesn't feel as nice as everything else. But it works pretty well as dosing cups go, and initially I think it was designed that you could also use it as a bellows inside there. This is okay, this is very nice. Let's make some coffee. Now, if you'd seen my recent video on spray bottles, you might have seen that this grinder doesn't just benefit from a spray of water onto the beans, it needs it. It really doesn't work very well without it. It's kind of essential in this particular regard. So beans into the little doser, and nothing has yet fallen through. Now, from a workflow perspective, this grinder is clearly designed to be used for espresso. It doesn't seem to acknowledge the existence of filter coffee the way that the EG1 or the P64 does. But this, it's a Portafilter fork. There's no dosing cup for filter coffee. It really feels more espresso focused. It doesn't mean it doesn't do a great job with filter coffee. It really does, and it's easy to adjust to filter coffee settings. I'm brewing V60s up around 10 through 12 most of the time on the grind setting, where I'm brewing espresso down at 3 most of the time. I can run the grinder, and when I'm ready to go, a little piece of metal here that you can flick to catch the last few bits, and there's nothing else coming out with the bellows. I'm going to shut it down. So, a little distribution. Out comes our distribution tool, just to break up any clumps, of which there are almost none, I would say. But it does help just distribute things. So let's talk taste. Shots have been great. Very enjoyable. Again, it's that unimodal style of espresso where you're going to have clarity, you're going to have balance, it's going to be tons of sweetness, all of those good things without necessarily a ton of texture. And it does push you towards slightly longer brew ratios. This is an 18.5 grams in to about 42 grams out. And you've got a bit of space to go bigger if you want to, just to really get a bit more clarity, but you will, again, deplete your textural experience. It's very tasty. It's very enjoyable. Now, talking about taste in this regard is difficult. An isolated experience is hard to talk about. Comparative testing is really everything, and that will be in the showdown video coming up after all the reviews, where we'll taste them all head to head and talk about the kind of espresso that they each make and how it varies from the other to help you decide which one you might aspire to own. Now, in terms of accessing bits and pieces of this, parts of it are quite easy for kind of cleaning or scraping every last bit out. The little exit point here can easily be removed with magnets. This also comes off as well. It's pretty easy to access there. The burrs are much more difficult to access. It's a little bit of a procedure. There's 4 bolts here. You have to take them off extremely carefully. It's not something you're going to do every day by any stretch. It's not easy to access the burr chamber the way it is in some of the other grinders that we've looked at. Not the most complicated, but one that would be a little bit stressful the first couple of times that you do it. It's something that you could get wrong, and that stresses me out. Whereas opening up the EG1, you just pull the pieces off and you're there. So a little bit of a con in that regard. And again, the other cons would be just the volume of stuff here, the weight and the volume of grinder that you have here. For that reason, I probably would never have something like this in my kitchen. I live in a city, kitchens are small. This I can't allocate this much space to a grinder in my home. Here in the studio, yeah, I've got space, and that becomes less of an issue. And if you've got space, you don't have to worry about that. But at home, a lot of people don't, and that's a bit of a difficult one to really overcome. The design is a bit frustrating because of that mess issue, the accumulation of dust and dirt around the sort of base and the fins here. On the upside, it makes very nice coffee. It's quiet, shockingly quiet, beautifully quiet. The kind of experience from a tools perspective is very nice. The grinder is easy to adjust. It's pretty repeatable. You know, where I've come back to a grind point, it has done what I've wanted it to do. We'll do more extensive retention tests and a few other things as part of the showdown video to really get into the minutiae of the details between each of these though. Overall, at $2,600, it's mid-range on price, which is a shocking thing to say about an espresso grinder. I feel a little bit like a spoiled child, just fussing and complaining about all these little details and not being grateful for the amazing coffee that they all brew, but that's my job, and I revel in it. So the Levercraft Ultra. Super interesting, some very new tech in there, some new ideas, some potential for exploration. Really feels centered around espresso more than anything else, though it is, as I said, very, very capable around filter coffee. $2,600, it's enjoyable, but it's big. Now I don't get to keep this unit. I'm giving this away to one of my Patreon backers because Patreon allows me to go and buy these things, to buy all of these things and review them, tell you my honest opinion and not be beholden to manufacturers lending me things or giving me freebies or any of that kind of stuff. So I look forward to giving all of these grinders away. And now I'd love to hear from you down in the comments below. Do you have one? Do you want one? Do you have one of the ones manufactured in China? Is it different in some way? I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. Do you have one of the Levercraft ones? Have you enjoyed your coffee? Have you had experiences that other grinders haven't given you? Let me know your experiences down in the comments below. But for now, I'll say thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great day.